So in the last video, I spoke about a theory to reduce cancer rates, and I have a link of that video below. But in this video, I want to go over more details of how I believe this would work. So we know first we have a normal healthy cell, but then that cell begins to accumulate mutations, and as it accumulates more and more mutations, eventually it becomes a full-blown cancerous cell that grows uncontrollably. And we know that carcinogens increase the rate of cancers and therefore increase the rates of cancer. This is indisputable. This is essentially fact, and I believe this fact will never change. There will never be data that shows that this is not true. However, I believe there's another way you can lower cancer incidence. So before this cell has the chance to accumulate more bad mutations where eventually it goes out of control, if we could increase apoptosis and essentially nip it at the bud and kill this precancerous cell before it has the opportunity to gain more mutations where it goes out of control, if you can promote robust pro-apoptotic signaling to get rid of these precancerous cells, that also may lower cancer incidence. And there is actually quite a bit of data suggesting that this may be true, even though it's just a theory. So again, first you have a normal healthy cell, but then it begins to accumulate mutations. But something important to realize is every cell in our body is balancing whether it wants to do apoptosis or if it does not want to do apoptosis. So every cell is debating whether it should do apoptosis or if it should not do apoptosis. And what's important to realize is we have these precancerous cells with these accumulating mutations all over our body. So all of these precancerous cells are debating whether it wants to go through apoptosis, pro-apoptosis, or not do apoptosis, anti-apoptosis. And also there's a lot of crosstalk between these pathways. And it's important to realize this pro-growth is the same as anti-apoptosis. There's a lot of crosstalk and overlap with these pathways. So therefore, pro-growth, giving the cell a pro-growth signal, is the same as anti-apoptosis. Pro-growth is therefore don't kill yourself. So therefore, you should think of pro-growth as and anti-apoptosis as similar terms. But what's important to realize is when these cells have mutations and they're bad cells, they should induce apoptosis. Bad cells with accumulating mutations should induce apoptosis before they have the chance to accumulate more mutations. However, let's imagine we have this person with a lot of cells with these accumulating mutations. However, let's say for whatever reason they have excess growth hormone, or let's say they have high levels of IGF and insulin, or they're constantly activating their mTOR through insulin and branched-chain amino acids found in high concentrations in meat. These are pro-growth anti-apoptosis signals. So therefore, if we have a person with a bunch of precancerous lesions with these accumulating mutations, but you're constantly activating pro-growth anti-apoptosis through these different mechanisms, that's going to tell these bad cells to continue to grow because they're receiving these pro-growth signals which are outweighing the pro-apoptosis, pro-death signal. So therefore, if you have a bunch of precancerous lesions, but you have high growth hormone, IGF, insulin, or constantly activating mTOR, these bad cells are getting mixed signals. They're getting pro-growth signals, so they're going to continue to divide and accumulate more mutations. And as they accumulate more mutations, eventually things will go out of control, where they'll turn into a full-blown cancer. And I believe one of the best ways to do this is to constantly eat. If you're constantly eating, you have the insulin spike and the branched-chain amino acids from the meat, which is constantly activating mTOR. So again, every cell, every precancerous cell is debating pro-apoptosis, should it kill itself or should it not kill itself, and should it continue to grow? And if you're tipping the balance towards pro-growth anti-apoptosis through these mechanisms, all these bad cells are going to continue to divide and have the chance to accumulate more mutations and eventually turn into cancer. So therefore, tipping this balance towards anti-apoptosis pro-growth will allow precancerous cells to slip through the cracks and continue to divide and accumulate new mutations, eventually turning into a full-blown cancer, or at least would increase the rate of these bad cells turning into full-blown cancers. However, let's imagine another scenario. So again, let's say we have all these cells with accumulating mutations, these precancerous cells. However, let's say you're taking metformin. Well, metformin activates AMPK, which is pro-apoptosis. So again, there is crosstalk between these pathways, but if you're taking metformin every day, you're essentially upregulating the chances for pro-apoptosis. Also, Laron's syndrome, which is essentially the opposite of a ton of IGF and growth hormone, which is pro-growth. So essentially, it's the opposite of high IGF and growth hormone, because Laron's syndrome is when you have a receptor defect for IGF. So if you have a receptor defect for Laron's syndrome, therefore, you would have less pro-growth and more pro-apoptosis. Or if you take vitamin D, which affects the pro and anti-apoptosis signals, it essentially modulates apoptosis. Also, EGCG essentially stabilizes P53, so you effectively have higher levels of P53. And also, just having functioning P53 will also, therefore, promote a robust pro-apoptosis signaling and sensing, which again will allow bad cells to induce apoptosis, which is what you want. Also, what's interesting is elephants have excess copies of P53, and they're known for having lower rates of cancer, which is a curious phenomenon because they have so many cells, so they have so many chances to form a cancer. However, they have so many copies of P53, so therefore they have a very robust pro-apoptosis signaling, and therefore they will very readily catch all these bad cells and readily get rid of them so they don't have the chance to accumulate more mutations and form cancer. Also, exercise essentially is similar to metformin. It puts the cell into a low energy state and therefore increases the rates of apoptosis. And also fasting, going through periods of fasting is probably one of the best things you can do, because theoretically, if you go through a period of fasting, all those bad cells will essentially increase apoptosis, and theoretically you could get rid of more. Just statistically, you could get rid of more of them. And also just having low mTOR activity. But the point is, essentially increasing apoptosis signaling should therefore theoretically lower cancer rates. And it's important to realize when I say you should promote apoptosis, this wouldn't initiate unregulated apoptosis. It wouldn't take all the cells in the body and initiate apoptosis, but what it would do is it would be very sensitive you would have very sensitive systems and processes involved that would essentially take all these precancerous cells that are accumulating damage and readily get rid of them. It would increase the chance of all the precancerous cells in our body to be caught quickly and remove them through these apoptosis signals, so they don't have the chance to accumulate more mutations where things really go out of control. So the point I'm trying to make is that we know reducing intake of carcinogens, promoting DNA repair, and simply reducing mutation rates should theoretically lower rates of cancer. This is undisputable. However, what also may be a good idea for people who are interested in research is thinking about promoting robust, healthy apoptotic signaling, which may keep these precancerous cells in check, nipping them at the bud and getting rid of them before they have the chance to form more mutations where things really go out of control. So therefore, it may be interesting to read into this and reading into the crosstalk between these two pathways. And again, we know a lot of these things, according to some epidemiological studies, lowers cancer rates. And one thing a lot of these things have in common is in some way they modulate apoptosis. And again, they don't just upregulate unregulated apoptosis where all the cells will go through unregulated apoptosis. They essentially promote a robust sensing of cellular damage and insults, and it will be very sensitive to sensing cellular damage and insults and readily committing pro-apoptosis. However, if you're getting mixed signals where, for example, let's say the cell has mutations, so therefore these systems will promote pro-apoptosis. However, if you're also getting a bunch of pro-growth signals and anti-apoptosis signals, that may tip the scale towards pro-growth and allowing it to continue to divide and accumulate more mutations. And we know these things have been shown to increase cancer rates. And these things have been shown to lower cancer rates. So are there other ways? I love metformin because metformin has been shown to lower cancer rates of many different types of cancers. And it's important to clarify that not all tumors are dependent on p53. And so this even theoretically wouldn't work for every single type of cancer. However, it may reduce overall tumor burden. So therefore, reading into these pathways in the crosstalk and thinking of ways to essentially promote healthy apoptosis signaling may theoretically lower cancer incidence.